Okay. Chapter.
You're not going to test it?
I don't. Well, it seems to be going. New mic, new everything. I'm getting into it. I got the Jim Morrison look this time. Inez has got. This is Ella. Here's JWoww. And here's No One Here Gets Out Alive. Chapter 4. Let's go find it. Okay, when it became apparent the Doors were to remain at the whiskey for a while, they had stopped taking the firing seriously after the first 2 weeks. All 4 of them moved. John and Robbie finally left their parents to share a small place in Laurel Canyon and to try to find other jobs for the band. Ray and Dorothy took a beachfront apartment that had but one room, 60 feet long, perfect for rehearsing. Jim moved into Ronnie Herron's place, a small $75 a month apartment a few blocks from the whiskey, and it was here that she began talking with Jim about drawing up a contract for what she called promotional management. She also began calling record companies, inviting representatives to come see what she called America's Rolling Stones. A few actually came. The Beach Boys producer, Nick Vanette, didn't like them at all. Lou Adler, who already had the Mamas and the Papas, was as unmoved as he had been when Jim and Ray took him their demo 9 months earlier. Some of the Rolling Stones came in when they were in town, and they weren't impressed either. Nor was Jack Holzman, the 36-year-old electronics freak and folk music producer who was founder and president of Elektra Records. Elektra was then a small company making its first inroads into the rock market with Love. As he left the whiskey that first night in middle June, Jack pronounced, "This group doesn't have it." Holzman was urged to see the Doors once more, by Ronnie of course, but also by Arthur Lee, the leader of Love. So he returned and decided there was something appealing in Ray's organ playing. By the 4th visit, he found himself making his pitch, offering the Doors a contract. He wanted them for 1 year, he said, with options for 2 more or until they delivered 6 albums, whichever was longer. In exchange, the Doors were to get $2,500 as an advance against future royalties of 5% of the record's wholesale price. Wow, only 5%. So for every dollar, they get a nickel for the wholesale price. So let's see, 5% back then the wholesale price probably would have been about $1. Wow, that doesn't seem... Is that how it really goes? Well, Jack's pitch emphasized Elektra's 2 most obvious characteristics, its sincerity and its size. Jack wanted it understood that Elektra was an intimate business operation whose small but tidy organization was always accessible. Elektra's artists, he said, had easy and immediate access to anyone in the company, and with so few artists signed, compared to Columbia, say, the staff could apply themselves more directly to promoting all the acts. It sounded good. There had been a time when the Doors had wanted only to be as big as Love. Now they wanted more, and maybe a small company could do it. Besides, it was the only firm offer that they'd had. They were cautious about contracts after their experience with Columbia, but also eager to record. They told Jack that they'd like to think about it, and Jack flew back to New York. The first person that they showed the contract to was Billy James, their friend from Columbia. He said he wasn't in a position to evaluate it fairly because he was about to leave Columbia to open the West Coast office for Elektra, if they elected to go with Elektra. Billy promised to do all he could do to get them everything they wanted, and then he told them to find themselves a lawyer who could give them advice that meant something. Dude, seriously? When they went to Ronnie Herron with the contract, she took them to her lawyer, Al Schlesinger, who promised to represent them with the caveat that in the event of a conflict with Ronnie, he'd have to take Ronnie's side. That made them nervous. So Robbie talked to his father, who was serving as their interim business advisor, and he sent them to his attorney, a dapper, white-haired Beverly Hills counselor with another wonderfully Runyon-esque name, Max Fink. During the time Max negotiated with Holzman, Jim seemed unusually tense. He had gone through 2 weeks of heavy drinking with the British when the British band Them had headlined at the Whiskey. What was that?
I don't know.
Are you okay? Did she fart?
I don't know.
I can't tell.
Are you farting?
Honestly, it sounded like she farted.
Are you farting?
It was like, maybe she's groaning.
Are you farting or groaning?
You see that? Amazing.
Hi, Wendy.
Okay. Them was headlining at the Whiskey. Them's a good band, right? For that group's singer-songwriter had not only the same surname as Jim, but also many of the same habits. Jim and Van Morrison, brown-eyed girl guy, right on, were convinced they were related, and they drank to it. That was followed by a period of heavier than usual drug taking. Nearly every day, Ronnie watched him swallow acid, and once she swears he smoked 6 ounces of grass in one day, which he managed to do by staying up half the night, chain-smoking bombers as thick as his index finger. The tiny apartment was littered everywhere with seeds and stems, and Ronnie was furious. Jim ignored her, saying that ever since Robbie and John had been busted, they were paranoid about drugs and were on his ass to get him to cut down. Just because those guys are into meditation, he left the sentence unfinished. Jim wasn't ready for meditation, but he went to one of the Maharizi's lectures to look into his eyes to see if he was happy. Jim decided he was and dedicated a song to him. Take it as it comes. Go real slow, you'll like it more and more. Take it as it comes. Specialize in having fun. But he wasn't about to take up the discipline of meditation. By now the Doors were packing the Whiskey with their own devoted fans. That's exciting. That must feel neat. One night Jim didn't show up for the first set, so Ray and Robbie and John played without him, with Ray singing all the vocals. Robbie went back to the dressing room afterward, and John and Ray hurried over to the Tropicana, where they hoped they'd find Jim. What an asshole. During the 10-minute ride, Ray and John talked about Jim and drugs. John was visibly upset, verging on anger. Ray was calmer. It just looks like Jim is taking a lot of drugs because you've cut down so much, he said. Yeah, well, I never took acid more than once a week, said John, and Jim's on it every other day, at least. They parked the car near Jim's room. John admits he never really understood Jim. He really wanted to get out of himself, totally go to the ends, as far as you can go, every time. Find out. I never understood because I came from the Indian side of metaphysics, the bright side, whatever. He was always into Nietzsche and what does it all mean, and existential exploration. Ray sighed as he crossed the parking lot, heading for Jim's $8 a day room. He muttered a line from a song. Break on through to the other side. John and Ray reached Jim's door. They knocked. There was no answer, but they thought they heard a movement. Jim? Come on, it's Ray and John. Finally, Jim opened the door. Jim gazed at the two. 10,000 miles, was all he said. Ray laughed. He didn't believe it was possible. A normal LSD hit was 350 to 500. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I said that wrong. I read it wrong. 10,000 mics. 10,000 mics. Now, by mics, I think they mean like micrograms, was all he said. Ray laughed. He didn't believe it was possible. A normal LSD hit was 350 to 500 mics. Come on, let's see what happens. You've already missed the first set. Let's give Tanzini something to remember. Jim scuttered back into his room, shaking his head. No, man, no. Here. He opened a drawer in his dresser. Here, take these. Jim scooped up 2 handfuls of LSD in little purple vials, offering them to John and Ray. Ray noticed there was a brick of grass in the drawer too, a full kilo. The second set was a shambles, but by the time the doors were to go on for the final 40 minutes, Jim was reasonably coherent. "We'll do the end this set," he said, nodding as if preoccupied. Is it all right?
I just bent over, that's why.
Oh, is that it? Oh, okay, we can change it around. The end was the Doors' most memorable work, or would be after this performance. It embodied the concept of rock theater even more than When the Music's Over. Starting as a simple 2-verse farewell song, it had recently been running 12 minutes in length. Jesus Christ. With Jim inserting and removing new bits of poetry nearly every time they performed it. Tonight, Jim had a new surprise. In dark chino pants and a t-shirt, hair curling to his collarbone, an unshaven Botticelli face, he lurked around the kinetic flash and shadow of the Whiskey-A-Go-Go dance floor. He stopped, stood watching the girls in the glass cages. On the floor were Vito and his music-crazed harlequins in see-through lace, who were known for picking the top new bands. They found the Birds at Ciro's, then Love at Beatolito's. They became members of Frank Zappa's Mother's Auxiliary. Vito and his entourage were admitted to the whiskey on weeknights free, for where Vito went, the paying customers soon followed. Jim slouched toward the stage, eyes lidded, head low on one shoulder. He watched John and Robbie and Ray get into position, then joined them, moving to one side near Ray's organ. There were the discordant sounds of warming up, followed by silence. Jim and the musicians remaining in darkness. The dance floor stilled. Jim hung on the microphone stand like a shirt, his head tilted back, eyes closed, one hand cupping the mic, the other covering one ear. He planted one booted foot on the base of the mic stand to begin a mournful recitation. "This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend, the end of our elaborate plans, the end of everything that stands, the end. No safety or surprise, the end. I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be, so limitless and free, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land?" The musical accompaniment was as hypnotic as Jim's plaintive, threatening voice. There were heartbeats from Ray's organ, sudden ejaculations from John's drums, sitar-like excursions from Robbie's guitar. Lost in a Roman wilderness of pain, and all the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain. Yeah, that's what it says. Jim's enunciation was careful. He paused between syllables, as he did when speaking, as if choosing words and phrases as carefully as a surgeon handling a scalpel. There was in his delivery and in the music a sense of holding back, a warning, anticipation, a fear. There's danger on the edge of town. Ride the King's Highway, baby. Weird scenes inside the gold mine. Ride the highway west, baby. The whiskey dance floor was motionless. This is historical. He's on 10,000 mics of acid. Packed with bodies holding on, staring at Jim, who hadn't moved since the song began. Even the bar was still. Nowhere in the club was there any talking. Even the waitresses were mesmerized by the figure on the stage. Ride the snake. Ride the snake to the lake, the ancient lake. The snake is long, 7 miles. Ride the snake. He's old. His skin is cold. The West is the best. The West is the best. Get here and we'll do the rest. The blue bus is calling us. The blue bus is calling us. Driver, where are you taking us? Jim squinted as if peeking at the audience, then shut his eyes again as the haunting sounds from the other three doors formed a mysterious backdrop. Jim's eyes opened. He eased the microphone from the stand and glared at the audience, legs braced, reciting the 12 lines that complete the song in its final version. And in less time than it takes to tell the story, propelled Jim into contemporary pop mythology. The killer awoke before dawn. He put his boots on. He took a face from the ancient gallery. And he walked on down the hall. It's like Game of Thrones. Take a face from the ancient gallery. I wonder if that's where he got that. No, sorry. He went into the room where his sitter lived, and then he paid a visit to his brother, and then he walked on down the hall. And he came to a door, and he looked inside. Father? Yes, son? I want to kill you. Mother? I want to fuck you. Jim's voice rose in a primal scream, making the sound of silk yardage being torn by broken fingernails. Excuse me. Making the sound of silk yardage being torn by broken fingernails. That's exactly what that sounds like, huh? Behind him, the instruments bellowed and shrieked. Neither John, nor Robbie, nor Ray had heard these words before, but they were not so startled that they didn't continue their improvised instrumental fill. When he heard Jim say something about fucking his mother, all the blood in Phil Tanzini's face rushed to his heart, which began racing. That, he growled, is the last time. Never, ever will the Doors enter the whiskey again, not even if they're paying their way in. Jim was still singing, his eyes closed. Come on, baby, take a chance with us. Come on, baby, take a chance with us. Meet me at the back of the blue bus. Come on, yeah! The band began a rapid chugging rush to the shuddering primal finish, with Jim grunting sensually. Then, returning to the same mysterioso opening, Jim sang what originally had been the song's second verse. This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. It hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. The end of laughter and soft lies. This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. It hurts me to set you free, but you'll never follow me. The end of laughter and soft lies. The end of nights we tried to die. This is the end. Slowly those on the dance floor moved back to their tables or to the bar. Depressed, sullen. Some demanded their money back. Others just wept. Some sat in the bathroom alone for hours after the performance.
No, they didn't.
I'm making that whole part up. That was not mine.
Okay.
They were blown away. No, they did not. They went to the dance floor, moved back to their tables or the bar. The waitresses began to take orders for drinks, and people resumed talking. Phil Tanzini was waiting upstairs in the artist lounge as the Doors entered. You, he shouted at Jim as he slouched into the room, are one foul-mouthed son of a bitch, and you are fired, all of you. Out, and don't bother to come back. The Doors knew he meant it this time. Fuck the mother, kill the father. Fuck the mother, kill the father. Fuck the mother, kill the father. Like a mantra, the words filled the dimly lit recording studio. There were other sounds, the tuning of instruments, the scrape and thunk of microphones being adjusted, the voice from the control room on the PA calling instructions. But all ears heard the soft, repetitious, annoying chant of Jim Morrison, who lay on the back near the drum kit. Fuck the mother, kill the father. Fuck the mother. The inspiration came from Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. Oedipus, murderer of his father, husband of his mother, solver of the riddle of the Sphinx, Jim said. You can really get into your head just repeating the slogan over and over. Fuck the mother, kill the father, fuck the mother. Sophocles had a romantic notion about Oedipus, one that Nietzsche wrote about. He called Oedipus the most sorrowful figure of the Greek stage, the type of noble man who, despite his wisdom, is fatal to error and misery, but who nevertheless, through his extraordinary sufferings, ultimately exerts a magical healing effect on all around him, which continues even after his death. Jim liked that. Fuck the mother, kill the father, fuck the mother. Okay, I think we're ready now. Paul Rothschild's voice came from the control room. When Jim didn't stop, he called again. Jim, I think we're ready now. Who is it?
Kitty.
Oh. Paul was the producer Electra had assigned them. He was stocky and little, about 3 inches shorter than Jim. And his kinky blonde hair was short because he had recently spent 8 months in jail for smuggling marijuana. Paul was the 30-year-old son of an opera singer and a literate British businessman, and had grown up in Greenwich Village's liberal, kooky mold. Jack Holzman flew him to Los Angeles to hear the Doors at the Whiskey in July, and recording began after Labor Day. Rothschild and the Doors picked the songs that worked best in performance to make what Paul called an oral documentary. A studio bass player was brought in on 2 songs, and on a third the Doors stood up and stamped their feet to provide a rhythm track. But virtually everything else was done as if the funky Sunset Studio were a nightclub. Despite their unfamiliarity with studios and recording techniques, the Doors felt comfortable, and the first songs were laid down in only 2 or 3 takes apiece. Then came the song that would fill up more than half of one side of the album, the Oedipal epic drama, The End. Oh, God. Fuck the mother, kill the father, fuck the mother. Paul was getting impatient. Jim was stoned. Really? No way.
I was surprised.
No. As he lumbered to his feet, his Oedipal chant dying out at last, his eyes fell on the small television set he brought in. He looked at Johnny Carson, whose lips were moving silently. Then he picked up the set and threw it towards the control room, causing Paul and the engineers to duck. The set bounced off the thick, soundproof glass, separating them, and came back to the rest of the floor. Jim looked puzzled. Okay. All right. Fuck the mother, kill the father, fuck the mother. Paul was getting impatient. Jim was stoned, and as he lumbered to his feet, his Oedipal chant dying out at last, his eyes fell on the small television set he'd brought in. This is weird. He looked at Johnny Carson, whose lips were moving silently. Then he picked up the set and threw it towards the control room, causing Paul and the engineer to duck. The set bounced off of the thick, soundproof glass, separating them, and came back to rest on the floor. Jim looked puzzled. Paul halted the sessions, suggested the girl with Jim take him home. Nah, said Jim, disagreeing. Let's go hang out, man. Who would do that? Paul shook his head no, and eased Jim into the girl's car. She moved into traffic on Sunset, and Jim was mumbling, "Furthermore, kill the furthermore." Then he clearly said, "Got to get back to the studio. threw open the car door, and leaped out. He ran back, climbed the 8-foot-high wooden gate, somehow got through the outside door. Ooh. Show them.
Oh my god, I hate my phone.
He was breathing heavily as he peeled off his shoes and jeans and shirt. Fatima, kill the Fatima. Naked, he grabbed one of the large sand ashtrays and heaved it wildly. Then he pulled a fire extinguisher from a wall and sprayed the chemical foam all over the control board, the walls, and the instruments, ruining one of Robbie's guitars and a rented harpsichord. What is wrong with him?
Everything.
Jim, are you here? He put the fire extinguisher down. He heard a voice. It was Paul Rothschild, summoned by Billy Winters, the girl Jim had abandoned in the middle of the Sunset Strip. They were peering through the gate, and Jim ran outside. Hi, man. It's good to see you. Come in, man. Let's cut some songs. Wait a minute, man, said Paul. I mean, we got to get out of here. Let's go have a party someplace else. We'll get busted here, man. What a dumb way to fall. Jim was talked into leaving, but he forgot his shoes. And the following morning, the studio owner called Paul. He'd found these shoes in the middle of the destruction. Did Paul want him to find out who the shoes belonged to? Paul said, send the bill to Electra. And when the Doors entered the studio that afternoon, it was perfectly clean and damage wasn't mentioned. Okay, said Paul. Today we cut the end, and I think we can get it in one take. They got it in two. Later, when Ray, John, and Robbie kidded Jim about the fire he'd put out in the studio, Paul had eventually told them about it, Jim denied the story. The ashtray, they prodded him. The chemical foam. No, said Jim. Really? Here's our hero. There's the band. They look pretty cool. Ray was the first to appear on stage. Oh, wait. I missed a page. Sorry. Oops. Did I? No. No, said Jim. Really. Ray was the first to appear on stage, lighting a stick of incense. Then came Robbie and John, and finally Jim, in a sinewy street punk slouch. They were in a chic new disco called Ondine near Manhattan's 59th Street Bridge. There was one of those proper clubs designed by the uptown bohemian, a Brechtian cabaret where apocalyptic celebration was as thick as the marijuana smoke. This was the group's first out-of-town date, New York City. Jim's eyes were lidded. His head was tipped back, insolently. He planted one boot on the base of the mic stand, pushing his crotch up against the shaft, casually shook his mane of curly dark hair behind him. Robbie began the hypnotic first notes of Backdoor Man. There was a scream, the bark of a cougar at night, and then Jim sang, I'm a backdoor man, the men don't know, but the little girls understand. The word went out, hitting the street and spreading like a shipment of good, cheap Mexican weed. On the second night, all the top groupies came. You've got to see this group, one of them told all her friends. The singer is really ripe.
Shut up. It's dumb.
Yeah, it is a little. In the weeks that followed, Jim wandered the streets of lower Manhattan, drinking beer on the Bowery, looking inside the small boutiques that were opening on the Lower East Side, exploring the used bookstores on 4th Avenue. There were meetings with Elektra to sign the publishing agreement with Nipper Music, one of Jack Holzman's companies, named for Holzman's 10-year-old son, to approve the album cover photography, to agree reluctantly to edit Break On Through so that the line, she gets high, she gets high, she gets high, would be heard as, she get. This was to be the Doors' first single, and Holzman was afraid the word high would discourage airplay. Because the Doors had very little money, they spent many afternoons in the room in the Henry Hudson Hotel, watching soap operas on television, smoking dope. Occasionally, when he got bored, Jim would hang by his hands from a hotel window ledge.
Of course.
When you're bored,
Of
as
course.
one does. Yeah.
Such an idiot.
It's a problem, for sure.
Cheeky.
The band returned to Los Angeles
Cheeky.
the end of November, and Jim moved in with Pamela Corson. They'd been seeing each other off and on for about a year, and now she had a small place in Laurel Canyon. If Pamela hadn't fully accepted Jim's irresponsibility, by now she'd come to expect it. To begin with, moving in for Jim meant little more than he was sleeping there, because he owned almost nothing and had nothing to move in. More important and frustrating to Pamela was the fact that just because Jim spent Tuesday through Friday night in her bed, it didn't mean he'd be there Saturday and Sunday or the following Wednesday or Thursday nights. In fact, it worked both ways. When the Doors were in New York, Pamela had called their hotel 3 times a day. Oh, publicity photo. Okay. To find Jim in his room, then gave up and began seeing a young actor named Tom Baker. When Jim returned and Pamela returned to Jim, the two men became friends, learning they shared a love for the theater and poetry and a nomadic military background. In the following weeks, the band had little to do, so they hung out at the tiny Electra office, helping prepare their record release. "Hi guys," said their old friend Billy James. "You ready?" "We've been thinking," said Ray, "and we're not sure we want a bio. We think where we came from and what our favorite colors are is irrelevant to our music." "You're right, of course," Billy agreed. "Still, sooner or later you're going to be asked what you're trying to do. It might be a good idea to lay that much out right away and be done with it." The 5 young men discussed the subject of publicity for nearly an hour. They appreciated the value of a successful image, but all the bios for other artists they'd seen, even those on the Electra list, were so boring. Billy wanted to walk to a window where he stared at the smog for a while and then said, "Well, how about we write it now? You guys can say anything you want, and that's what we'll send to New York." The office manager, Sue Helms, took everything down in shorthand and then typed it up for their approval. It filled 30 pages, and the part that was eventually released included some of Jim's most imaginative catchphrases, lines that would appear in print, defining and limiting the Jim Morrison image long afterwards. On stage, the Doors look like they're in their own world. Oh, this is from the press release. On stage, the Doors look like they're in their own world. The songs are space-like and ancient. It sounds like carnival music. When it ends, there is a second of silence. Something new has come into the room. You could say it's an accident, that I was ideally suited for the work I am doing. It's the feeling of a bowstring being pulled back for 22 years and suddenly let go. I'm primarily an American, second to Californian, third a Los Angeles resident. I've always been attracted to ideas that were about revolt against authority. When you make your peace with authority, you become an authority. I like ideas about breaking away or overthrowing of established order. I'm interested in anything about revolt, disorder, chaos, especially activity that seems to have no meaning. Yeah, especially activity that seems to have no meaning. Hi. Thank you.
Gross. He's got garbage breath.
Yeah. Okay. In the first week of January 1967, the album titled The Doors and the single Break On Through were both released. A billboard showing their faces and the message, The Doors, Break On Through, with an electrifying album, became the first rock signboard on the Sunset Strip, and the band went into Bill Graham's Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco, third billed to the Young Rascals and the Sopwith Camel. The pay, $350, was minimal, but the venue was America's best. They went to San Francisco early, in time for the Human Be-In on Wednesday, a catalytic and spiritually orgasmic event that entered pop mythology even before the day was over. All the doors were immensely impressed by the gathering in Golden Gate Park. The Haight-Ashbury era was formalized that week in San Francisco, and the Doors, to a man, felt a part of it. Oh, cool billboard. Cool album cover. It's a classic look. Like that looks like the Stooges record and some Stones records. You know, the Beatles did one kind of like that. We should do that. Do one where it's all black and lit from the side. We should do that. The Exbats. They opened their set at the Fillmore with their single, Break On Through, and then played the song Jim had dedicated to the Maharishi, Take It As It Comes. Both of them songs of contemporary existential advice. Usually the band at the bottom of the bill gets little attention at such concerts, but by the third song, the Young Rascals and Sopwith Camel and Fillmore fans begin to push toward the stage to listen more intently. The band played Light My Fire. I can't believe that's your first mention of the song. You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar. Do you know this song? If I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. This was essentially Robbie's song. He had written the melody and nearly all the words, with only a small assist from Jim. But Ray had invented a carnivalesque opening organ run that soon came to be regarded as a kind of definition of the Doors' sound. More significantly, the song was 7 or 8 minutes long, most of it an instrumental interlude that made it clear the Doors were more than Jim Morrison. The band claimed they never played this song twice the same way, but used it as an oral loom on which to weave intricate and jazzy improvisation, building to a dizzying climax. The time to hesitate is through, no time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. 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 The Fillmore audience stood hypnotized. In the second set, the Doors performed The End, and Jim, trying to grab the mic, went tumbling into the drums, hurting his back, coming as it did after he screamed, "Mother, I want to fuck you." The audience thought the tumble part of the strange choreography. By the following night, their word was out in another city. Go to the Fillmore to see the opening act. The Doors returned to San Francisco 3 weeks later for another series of performances at the Fillmore. Third billed, this time to Grateful Dead and the Junior Wells Chicago Blues Band. And, as at the Whiskey, they blew the headliners off the stage. For the next 2 months, until the middle of March, the band remained in California, nudging their single up the charts by calling the leading rock radio station to request the song until it was number 11 in Los Angeles. They were picking up momentum. They did a benefit concert for KPFK-FM. Would you mind reading a few minutes?
Yep.
Thank you.
I know, Jiro.
Anybody behind me?
Yes.
Oh.
Where were you?
There.
For the next 2 months until the middle of March, the band remained in California, nudging their single up to the charts by calling the leading rock radio station to request a song until it was number 11 in Los Angeles. They were picking up momentum. They did a benefit concert for KPFK-FM, the listener-supported Pacifica station. Then they played the old Moulin Rouge, now called the Hullabaloo, and worked for a week at Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip. where they were given a small but encouraging review in the Los Angeles Times. The same week, in late February, another Times critic, John Mendelsohn,
Okay.
The same week, in late February, another Times critic, John Mendelsohn, called Jim somewhat over-mannered, murky, and dull, and said the end, and was exploration of how bored he can sound as he recites singularly simple, overrated, psychedelic non-sequiturs.
Oververbalated psychedelic non sequiturs? Something like that?
It's not oververbalated, but non-sequitur, whatever, and follicries. Nearly a year later, Jim met this critic in an elevator, and once the elevator was in motion, the critic could not escape. Jim smiled and said, singularly simple, over-elaborated, psychedelic non-sequiturs, and how do you say that? Fallacies?
Yeah.
Fallacies, huh? Then the Doors went to San Francisco for their first appearance at the Avalon Ballroom, the funkier and hipper of the city's two large dance halls. There they were headliners performing after sets by the Sparrow and Country Joe and the Fish. By now, Jim and Pamela had a new apartment in Laurel Canyon on Rothdale Trail. The place was sparsely furnished. Oh, there's a picture. The place was sparsely furnished. In the background was the constant burr and rattle of traffic on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. Often Jim sat on the balcony with beer, watching the people enter and leave the country store, a small grocery only 50 yards away, in a garage apartment just 2 doors away lived the friendly neighborhood dealer, an ex-disc jockey named Ted. It was to him that Pamela went for heroin, a drug she seldom used, but one she kept a secret from Jim. Oh, please don't tell Jim, she'd plead. Don't ever, ever tell Jim. He'd absolutely kill me. Yeah, he would, because he's fucking insane. Pamela was at Gazzari's every night. Gazzari's every night. The Doors were there. And when the Doors weren't working, she was on the strip with Jim, sitting nearby as he drank himself into a frenzy and then joined whatever band was playing in whatever place they were to sing it for as long as they'd put up with him. Then they'd walk home. They'd be tired and drugged and boozed and it would be late after 2 a.m. and their apartment was 20-minute walk uphill. Please, Jim, please let's hitch a ride tonight. Jim would always say no, and night after night they walked. Pamela would hang her arm behind Jim's back, holding on to him, her head against his right shoulder, bobbing and dozing. She'd stumble and wake up. Please, Jim, let me hitch. Come on, honey, it's just a little further. It's only a few more steps. Later, Jim wrote a song about their place on Rothdale Trail called Love Street. Like all his other songs about or dedicated to Pamela, there was a hesitancy, a refusal to make a final commitment, a biting sting at the end. She lives on Love Street, lingers long on Love Street. She has a house and a garden. I would like to see what happens. She has ropes and she has monkeys, lazy diamond-studded flunkies. She has wisdom and knows what to do. She had me and she has you. I see you live on Love Street. That's the store where the creatures meet. Wonder what they do in there. Summer Sunday in a year. I guess I like it fine so far. But he was still sleeping wherever unconsciousness caught him.
Ricocheted.
See? It's a word I know, but I've never had to read.
Yeah.
He ricocheted along the Sunset Strip and singing in instantly forgettable bands, getting fallen down drunk with pickup friends. One night he raced intoxicated through a Hollywood cemetery looking for Valentino's grave. Another he played Matador with the fast-moving cars. On a third he incinerated a number of his notebooks and poems in a girlfriend's kitchen. Tandy Martin will be dipped. Well, I'll be dipped. Jim was surprised to see his high school sweetheart in New York. It was mid-March, and the Doors were there again for another week at Ondine. Tandy told Jim she was married to a painter who was the poetry editor of the East Village Other, a successful underground newspaper. Jim invited her to Jack Halsman's apartment at his dinner date and made it clear as he introduced her that she was an old friend, not another of his pickups. Robbie, this is Tandy Martin. I went to school with her. Jack, this is Tandy. She was my friend in high school. After dinner, Jim got drunk. Do you always drink this much, Jim? Not always. Sometimes I drink more, he laughed. Tandy looked at Jim blankly. I've been drinking, Jim said finally, but I'm getting good at it. I can tell now I can, gouge everything so that...
Gauge.
That's not gauge.
G-U-A-G-E?
G-U-A-G-E? No.
Gauge. G-A-U. Sorry. Gauge.
Gauge everything, so that I stay in one place. Every sip is another chance, another flashing chance at bliss. Jim's rap came rolling out like molasses, one phrase poetic, the next incoherent. They were seated in Jack's big living room near a window. He stared out the lower Manhattan night, not looking at Tandy as he talked. Oh, maybe he's referring to Jim talking. We're supposed to be getting songs together for the second album. We have enough, but I've been trying to write some more. Do you still have those journals you used to let me read? Jim looked at Tandy, frightened, but he was about to say, some of them, but I can't find a lot of them, and I stupidly burned some in L.A. when I was on acid. Do you think if I took some sodium pentothal, I could remember what I wrote in them? Tandy, for some reason, he seems way more normal in this.
What do you mean?
He just seems more normal instead of his weird self.
Oh.
Tandy sat quietly, hands folded on her lap, looking at Jim intently, sadly. They both were oblivious of the others in the room. Jim began rummaging around in his pockets, extracting thick wads of napkins, matchbook covers, and business cards. Somebody gave me the name of a shrink, he said, finally holding a torn envelope aloft. A lady shrink. He dropped into his stupid, walking through quicksand voice. What do you think of that? I think it might help, maybe not, but but what have you got to lose? It can't hurt. Jim sat silent for a moment, then said, "Oh, I don't need a shrink. I don't have to do that. I don't have a drinking problem." Then he asked her to come hear him at Ondine. Hey, Jim, Ray was calling from across the room. Time to go to the club. You ready? When Tandy arrived at Ondine, Jim had forgotten to put her name on the list at the door, and she was refused entrance. Then Jim arrived.
Hey, I think it might be Ondine.
Ondine?
I think.
Okay. Tandy was irate. Jim, God damn you, Jim. That man just treated me like trash. Now you telling him you forgot to leave my name? Tell him you just made me look like a fool. Jim said to the man at the door, I was, supposed to leave her name. He turned back to Tandy. Is that okay? He asked sweetly. Then he told her to go to his dressing room. He'd see her later. And he went to the bar where dozens of New York's trendiest faces were eager to buy him drinks. Really. Much of the adulation was due to critical acceptance of the Doors, and especially Jim was getting from Richard Goldstein, who at 25 was one of the 2 or 3 most important rock music critics in the country. He had missed the Doors their first time in Ondine. Is that what you said?
Like Ondine?
Ondine, sorry. But on a visit to Los Angeles, he had heard them at Gazzari's, and now he was in their corner calling their Ondine return a stunning success in the Village Voice and describing the album as a cogent, tense, and powerful excursion of the end. He argued that anyone who disputes the concept of rock literature had better listen long and hard to this song. It was, Goldstein said, no less than Joycine Pop. He called Jim a street punk gone to heaven and reincarnated as a choir boy. Man, you should have seen the letters, John said to the others a week later back in Los Angeles. Dave Diamond took me and Robbie to his house, and the mail was stacked this high. Everybody wants to hear Light My Fire, Robbie added. Dave says we're nuts if we don't make it our next single. Dave Diamond's Diamond's Mine was one of the top rock radio shows in Los Angeles, and it was one of several on which the song was being played. But how to release it? On the album, it was nearly 7 minutes long, and the average single ran less than half that. Someone told Jim to put the song on 2 sides of a 45 in the tradition of the Part 1 and Part 2 songs of the past. Others told him not to compromise, to release the song unedited. Hadn't Dylan had a hit with the 6-minute Like a Rolling Stone? Jack Holzman, however, held out for a shorter version, asking the Doors to return to the studio and record the song again. They tried that, but in the end asked their producer, Paul Rothschild, to take a piece out of the instrumental break. A few days later, the Doors were at Ciro's on the Sunset Strip, the one-time glamour club for film stars, more recently the launch pad for the Byrds. Jim had worked hard to prepare for this date. On stage, he did a shaman's dance, whirling and leaping and swinging the microphone, then heaving the microphone stand and falling on it to rise and retrieve it to throw it again, and a tall black woman with a shaved head joined him in his dance. David Thompson, an old film school pal who was running the club's light show, was so gripped by the performance that he shut off his equipment and stood through the remainder of the set, staring. A young man came out of the audience as he, thrown by a giant spring, embraced Jim, offered him communion from his cup. Jim drank. Afterward, Jim and the others talked excitedly. They had gotten a high on stage, and they had gotten the audience high. A week later, the Doors did it again, playing to 10,000, their first really big audience at a high school stadium in San Fernando Valley, where they opened for the show, where they opened the show for San Francisco's Jefferson Airplane. It was a Doors audience. After the Doors played, a third of the stadium walked out. Until now, the Doors' business and bookings had been handled largely by Electra and Robbie's father, or by the boys themselves. But when Light My Fire appeared on the national sales charts, they concluded at the time it was time to get them some professional managers. The move was not promoted entirely by anticipated success. As Robbie recalled, Jim was freaking, giving us trouble. We'd have to try hard in those days just to get a gig, and then we'd have to try hard to get Jim there on time. So we'd said, why should we do this? We ought to get a manager to babysit. Of course, they had the usual reasons for seeking a manager: to get them a booking agency and hire publicists, to organize their lives and operate the business efficiently, to serve as a protective wall between them and its promoters, club owners, press, and public, and, as Ray put it, to answer the goddamn telephone. After a few weeks of looking around and discussing a few offers they had, the Doors finally signed with Asher Dam, a prosperous realtor who sold homes to stars and now wanted a bigger slice of the glamour pie, and his new partner, Sal Bonafide, who had directed a successful East Coast group called Dion and the Belmonts, and currently managed a busty middle-of-the-road belter named Laney Kazan. Like Jim, Asher was a shy charmer, and he was handsome in the California tennis style. Since he was also a heavy drinker, he was regarded as Jim's #1 babysitter. Sal was slick, talked fast, and in no way appealed to Jim, who thought he looked like a mafia don. All he lacked was a mustache. Sal and Ash, who talked 15% of the Doors who were taking 15% of the Doors' earnings, plus expenses, a standard contract, quickly stirred the group to a booking agency and publicity firm. Todd Schiffman was a trim 25-year-old agent who wore checkered suits and wide ties. First thing he did was drive the band's concert price up. At the time, they were getting $750 to $1,000 a night in Los Angeles, but in New York, they had 3 weeks coming up. They were to do 3 shows a night for $750 a week. Todd, $750 a week.
That seems like a horrible deal.
Todd thought those prices were far too low, so he went to work on a small-time talent buyer for Denver schools who had called requesting the airplane for 2 nights in September. By the time Todd got through fast-talking and bluffing him, the promoter had agreed to take the Doors instead for $7,000. As it appeared, when September came, the Doors were worth more than that, but in April, before Light My Fire, the deal established a price the agent would continue to use to the band's advantage. One exception was made. That was in the May 7th performance at the Valley Music Theater in the suburban Los Angeles for $750. A thank you to Dave Diamond, who promoted the show and grossed over $10,000. Grossed over $10,000 on it for helping to build their local following.
Is he wearing a headdress?
Yes, or something like that.
That's amazing. There's an Indian inside of him.
Yeah.
Because when he was a little kid, do you know what happened?
Mike Gershom, a smooth New Yorker, recently transferred to Beverly Hills to start the rock department of Rogers, Cohen, and Brenner. The General Motors of Hollywood publicity learned about the rock scene by going to a store and asking for a dozen records by bands with freaky names. What he found out was enough to make him bombard Time and Newsweek with pitch letters for the Doors. The Doors team was complete. They had a lawyer in his 50s, I almost said fitties, like killed fitty men, whose specialty was criminal law, but also enjoyed legal work associated with show business. They had managers drawn not to their music, but to Jim's star potential. They had a youthful agent and publicist who both were starting new departments and were thus eager to prove their worth. It was a casual assortment, but not unusual. Summer of '67, June was good. On the 3rd, the edited version of Light My Fire made its first appearance on all the national charts, and then the Doors went to San Francisco to headline for the first time at the Fillmore, playing with the Jim Queskin Jug Band. On the 11th, they flew to New York, where they met by Elektra's new publicity director, Danny Fields, and whisked by rented limousine to the Village Theater on the Lower East Side, where radio station WOR-FM was celebrating its first anniversary. Other bands had already performed when the Doors arrived, and a bunch of local jazzers posing as rock and rollers were finishing a noisy set. The Combier, one of the WOR-FM's disc jockeys, made some reference to lighting up and introduced the Doors. The curtain went up, and Jim went with it, holding on with both hands. The applause was prolonged. A day later, the Doors started what would be their last nightclub date, 3 weeks in another New York's modish discotheque. I literally don't know. Discotheque?
Discotheque?
Are you serious? That's how you spell discotheque? Oh my god.
Oh my gosh.
Tinky,
what is wrong?
This one run by a charming self-promoter and scene maker named Steve Paul and called appropriately The Scene, like on Dean or whatever. The Scene was a mecca for the pop cognoscenti.
That's good, cognoscenti.
A late night spa that attracted frickle uptown happers in crushed velvet jeans and gear imported from Carnaby Street.
Carnaby. I'm sorry, I don't mean to correct you. I won't.
It doesn't matter. Probably should. Others came from the East and the West Village, the stoned-out music freaks wearing feathers and fringed peace symbols and oddball theatrical costumes. As it happened, many of these New Yorkers had gone to California the same week to attend the Monterey Pop Festival. The Doors had been overlooked until it was too late, according to the festival director, John Simon, and that bothered them, especially when the scene was closed for 3 days and the Doors shuffled off to do shows on Long Island and Philadelphia. Jim was moody and drinking excessively. He went for long, solitary walks that stretched from the time he awoke, usually in the afternoon, until he had to go to the club. Once on a Monday night, he accompanied Danny Fields and Paul Rothschild to Max's Kansas City on the east side and refused to speak to anyone all night. At the Long Island show during the Pop Festival weekend, he startled the other Doors by attempting to take off his clothes on stage. Still, the shows were good, and Jim's mood improved when Richard Goldstein again turned over a large portion of his Village Voice column to the band, calling Jim a sexual shaman, saying the Doors begin where the Rolling Stones leave off. Lillian Roxon, another respected rock critic, said the Doors were undurable pleasure prolonged. Then Pamela came to New York to be with him. Now he wandered the city with her, running into an old friend from Los Angeles, Trina Robbins, who had a boutique where Pamela bought several pairs of velvet bell-bottoms. Back at the hotel, Tom Baker called. Pamela said Jim was closing that night. Could he come? Tom said yes, and he'd bring friends with whom he intended to make a movie, Andy Warhol and Paul Morrissey. Tom sidled up to Jim at the post-concert party. How's it going? Pretty good. Ray joined them. That's right, the Beatles bought 10 copies of the album. Jim added, yeah, we must be doing okay, because Pamela's looking for a house. In the week that followed, the Doors played 2 other dates, second bill to Simon and Garfunkel at Forest Hills, New York, and top bill in Greenwich, Connecticut High School Auditorium at Forest Hills. They faced a Simon and Garfunkel audience totally disinterested in Jim's pyrotechnics, not even caring much for rock. How'd it go? Danny Fields asked when Jim appeared to Electric's offices the following Monday. They'd laugh at me. Danny's voice dropped. What do you mean? They opened the curtains and there I was and they laughed. Those fuckers hated me. I hated them. I wanted to kill them. I never hated anybody so much before. The rest of the show I couldn't get off. I hated them so much.
You just hate Simon and Garfunkel fans?
At the same time, Light My Fire was moving fast, its popularity sweeping from west to east, much to the Doors themselves.
But all Jim could think about was killing every last fan of Simon and Garfunkel.
The third week of June, it entered the hollowed top 10, and there it hung for a solid month, inching upward. Finally, on July 25th, Sal and Ash got a call from Lectra. Would you please tell the boys, the voice said, that next week's issue of the Billboard, the Doors are number 1. They made it, number 1. True stardom was at hand.
Fan-fucking-tastic. All right, there you go. It's hot here today. Not a lot of energy. Um, you know,
Bye.
yeah, we'll see you for 6. Adios, rock and roll fans.